Hello, everyone. We're 5 minutes into the soundtrack, so let's call it there. Today, we are joined by Sterling and Mariana, who is a Logos core contributor, and also published an article today on the Logos press engine called Social Institutions in the Era of Blockchain-Based Governance. So I'm sure she'll be talking about that with us today. Should we kick it off, Sterling?
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Logos. Can everybody hear me loud and clear? We'll do a little bit of a sound check. Cool. So the good news here is that we are also now broadcasting this live via YouTube with Chair and I actually on video. We'll see about getting a link shared. Are we all good? I guess we're not delaying too bad on the other end. So just doing a little bit of a check.
So far, so good. I'll reply with the links. But if you're here on X, you should see the broadcast up there in the top.
So fun. The marvels of technology. Cool. Well, without further ado, let's get started on the space. We have Mariana here. We have quite a bit to talk about. But what I'm going to do first is start with the usual disclaimers, right? You guys know how we roll at Logos. So number one is any of the ideas, thoughts, philosophies, or any type of intrusive thoughts that we happen to share are the products of our own minds, and they are not affiliated with the Logos brand, identity, movement, community, or peoples. The other thing that we always want to mention is that if we happen to talk about individual cryptocurrency, blockchain projects, or anything that is blockchain adjacent, please do your own due diligence before you get involved with those platforms. Do not ape in or YOLO in to a cryptocurrency project without doing your due diligence. That is a pretty typical thing to do and a safe bet, I would argue. Cool. The other thing is this is a guest space. So we're going to have a little chit chat with Mariana for about an hour. It'll be Chair and I, and of course, Logos. And then after that, we can have, if any of you guys want to chat with Mariana, or you have questions, or you want to engage in the conversation, please don't hesitate to raise your hand, and we will cordially invite you up to the stage to speak. Right? Cool. So the context for this discussion, I think, is clear. Mariana, being the brilliant person that she is, wrote an article for the Logos press engine, a really, really fantastic article that really gets into the weeds, the practical weeds of governance, blockchain-based governance, and what governance is starting to look like and going to look like in the context of these communities, not only in the digital space, but potentially in the physical space, which is an aspect of the conversation and the topic that I'm particularly interested in. So without further ado, what I want to give Mariana the opportunity to do is to introduce herself, and then she can perhaps explain her work and what drew her to studying blockchain governance, blockchain generally speaking. So welcome to the stage, Mariana. Really happy to have you up here. It's the first time we've had you as an official guest. You and I have known each other and been colleagues for a good while. So thank you for being here. Really looking forward to this discussion.
Thank you, Sterling, and thank you everyone that is here. I am very happy and pleased to join the space, to be the guest today. Well, a little for those who don't know me, I work full-time at Logos. So I'm basically doing institutional and governance research. I began with the Special Economic Zones project, and then I moved into other topics. And before Logos, well, I am an economist, and I work a lot of years on social policy and development, and as a policy maker and policy evaluator. But then I studied blockchain a long time ago at the University of Nicosia. I am talking about 2019. And then, well, I'm still very newbie in this technology and trying to learn more every day as it changes at the speed of the light, the technology. Well, and then when I finished the master studies, I decided to leave my former activities and moved 100% time to blockchain. And then, well, in one of my curiosity to study governance and institutions is not only, well, since I was working in policymaking, but here in one of my assignments and courses in the University of Nicosia, when we learn about decentralized organizations and how this model could extend even to replace or redefine governments and all sorts of organizations. In one of my assignments, I made a case study in the use of blockchain to eliminate intermediaries in public procurement procedures, thinking on eliminating the embezzlement of public funds, right? That was my idea, because corruption in the public sector happens mostly through acquisitions, contracts to cronies, given to cronies, right? So I was thinking, okay, this is the technology I was awaiting for to eliminate corruption. So I did my assignment on that, and then I said, well, blockchain is so powerful that I find impossible that governments would like to adopt it and eliminate corruption, right? So because it's like them shooting in their feet. So I said, Then I wrote an article about tokenizing public budget and grant and subsidy management. But I still wanted to, I still had that obstacle in my head, in my mind, no? Government won't change. Not all the governments will like to change to something that eliminates corruption using blockchain. Then when I began working on the special economic zone project in Lagos, in the Institute of Free Technology, I was thinking on during this research, I was analyzing which institutions could be put on chain so that this new parallel system, a free city or a special zone or whatever the name we want to call it, how can we start from scratch with on-chain institutions such that procedures are transparent and efficient and very easy to enter and exit the system. So I was thinking on residency, land registries, company registries, dispute resolution mechanisms. And I say, okay, these are parallel institutions. But let's see, but my curiosity goes, I want to explain it to myself. So I wrote this article, maybe if someone reads it and tell me if can add to my thinking. I want to understand how these systems are building their institutions on chain. How can such social systems actually function and become sustainable? Because on-chain mechanisms can also are not like determined to be successful at the 100% of the times. No, there might be also things, challenges, and areas to analyze and make them sustainable. So in trying to respond to all of these questions, well, I began this research, and the article does not respond to everything. It's just like the first attempt to understand and explore this further. This is also my personal curiosity because of my background on public sector that shapes me to think on what are the rules in the system, what are the incentives, and this is something I personally enjoy. So that's like what drove me to write these ideas, not just to keep them in myself, no, but to start to share with the public and and learn more with their feedback. So yeah, that's like why I'm studying this governance, blockchain governance, right? And it's fascinating. When I started to search literature years ago, we could only find papers like the Lex Cryptographica from Primavera de Filippi, or but the literature was very scarce. And now, when I started this research, I find a lot of more analysis in relation with blockchain and governance, right? So, well, I call it an institutional revolution. I don't know if you want me to go deeper in why I call it a revolution, an institutional revolution, and not just a technological one, or just a disruptive innovation that is there, and I call it a revolution. I don't know if that could be interesting for me to expand.
Yeah, I think we can talk about that. Maybe before we get into the revolutionary piece of it, Mariana, which I think is going to be really important and probably segues into other areas that we can discuss. First of all, I want to say I really personally like your history and your expertise in the space. It seems like not only did you just get interested in blockchain, but you wanted to take it to the next level, and you really delved deeply. And this is really shown or comes through very strongly in your article, because you mentioned, and this is the title of the space too, and this probably plays into the revolutionary piece you're talking about. But what we're doing is, it seems like we're replacing, right, as a species, we're replacing hierarchical institutions, top-down institutions, with a what you refer to as a polycentric order, right? And first, I think maybe we should define what that means, what a polycentric order is. I mean, I know, right? And it's very strongly linked to decentralization and a decentralized quote unquote law. I want you to define it in your words, and then we can get into a person that you mentioned a couple of times in the article, who is a brilliant theorist on understanding the commons, and that's Elinor Ostrom. But let's start with what polycentric order means. Let's understand that. I think that's going to be important for the audience.
Yes. Well, polycentric order it's in a social system. A polycentric system means that there are multiple and independent decision-making, like nodes, no, groups of people or societal actors, where the decisions are made in there's no group that has more authority and decision-making, final decision over the others. So it is like all are coordinating and interacting to make an optimal decision for their community. So these systems are not are autonomous, are experimental in their inherently experimental, because they do not have fixed rigid rules. They can change the rules every now and then. They're as flexible as the community or the society requires. If something is not working, these systems have multiple ways of interacting and giving feedback, so that the system self-corrects. So it's very, so when we study polycentric system, we say, okay, cool, does this resonates like blockchain? And I said, yeah, no, because these are encoded rules in blockchain where the system can also self-correct, no? And polycentric systems lead to the concept of self-governance and self-determination, because there's no single authority or central authority that dictates the rules, no? It is a collective decision. And well, polycentric systems can fail and also can be very successful. It doesn't mean that Polycentric is like 100% guaranteed it is going to be a successful system. So that's why also Elinor Ostrom, in her studies, we have detected some patterns or principles, she called it good practices or principles, that good polycentric systems show, no? Like having enough information and information flows such that the choice set where these groups that interact and decide have more complete information, more awareness of what are they doing and why they are deciding, and they establish boundaries on and who does what, no, roles, monitoring, enforcement, so that, and these roles are not fixed, they are also dynamic. You can be like a monitor one day and then the other day you enforce, or you give feedback to modify rules and negotiate with other groups. So these systems exist in our world. The problem is that the dominant model is the top-down hierarchical structure. No, that's like the dominant way. So we cannot see a lot of polycentric systems, but for example, communities that manage natural resources, basically irrigation systems, forests, or indigenous communities that have complete management of their lands and their resources, and they do not overexploit them in this tragedy of the commons, because they have this kind of arrangements where they cooperate and they have they are whether voluntarily cooperating for the sustainability of the community, or they are or they accept the rules that all the community decided, so that they can live in a with harmony, no? So these are very when in trying to study how blockchain governance functions and what are the kind of institutions in this new order, I thought on polycentric systems right away. And this also is like a useful theory or conceptual framework to understand complex systems. And that also explains to me why traditional hierarchical governance is obsolete, no? Rephrasing Farewell to Westphalia, why these institutions, yeah, we can see they are obsolete, because they cannot handle complex systems. And we live in a society that is very complex, hyper-connected, with multiple preferences and tastes and ideas and mindsets. So it is not possible for traditional governments and the current system to aggregate preferences. If you give what, let me put examples that are maybe not very good, but if you support for example, the LGBTQ communities, then you have the other side trying to defend Christianism and family and traditional couples, you know? So for a government to give one group what they desire is at the cost of the others. So this is a problem of aggregating preference in my understanding. And this is why traditional centralized infrastructure, institutional infrastructure, is obsolete and cannot handle this multiplicity of persons, profiles, ideas, religions, etc. So polycentric or system theory is, I think it manages or addresses better complex systems. And that's what I said, okay, this is the way to analyze this topic, right? And of course, Elinor Ostrom is one of my preferred economists, institutional economists, but also because she, well, I mentioned it, I mentioned Elinor many times here, because, well, blockchain is paving the way to decentralization, disintermediation, and we can study these spontaneous orders from her legacy. No, this drove me to analyze more on liberals like Austrian economists, and also, but at the end of the day, I said Elinor has a lot of things to say. Despite she passed away, her legacy is still valid in this world of in this blockchain era, right? So that's what I mentioned her. She won the Economics Nobel Prize in 2009. She was the first woman to receive this award in economics for her analysis in governance and common pool resources. But she did more than just studying the tragedy of the commons. She, for example, her work delved into collective action, intricacies, conditions, incentives that you find in complex systems, and how these systems can reach order if there is no central authority. And she studied that. And her thesis challenged in that time, in the time she worked, already challenged dominant hierarchical systems, neoclassical economists for sure, that have this dichotomy in like if a good is private, then it is the market that will supply it because there are private incentives to do it. But if the good is non-private or the service is public, then it has to be a government that imposes rules and taxes to provide the public goods to self-interested individuals that would not contribute in if they are not mandated to pay taxes. So she challenged this idea, saying that this dichotomous view of the world could explain some patterns to some extent, but still it cannot explain adequately, for example, internal dynamics in private firms, and it doesn't deal with the diversity of institutional arrangements she found in which humans craft, govern, provide, and manage public goods. So she wrote that in her paper called Beyond Markets and States, Polycentric Governance of Complex Economic Systems. And she is very radical to, well, not radical, very, she challenged this idea, no? That we have to have a government to have public goods. And she shows that it isn't the case, no? In her other paper, Collective Action and the Evolution of Social Norms, it's so wonderful. It's very dense paper, but it's interesting. She, for example, refers many behavioral experiments in laboratories where she proves that, well, if you ask someone to cooperate for a public good, if in a linear way, that you say, will you cooperate for this whatever, the streets or light in the streets, etc., the rational egoist will say no, and no matter how many rounds of this exercise you make, the dominant strategy is to not cooperate. But she didn't stop there and then say, okay, let's see what happens if we instead of just thinking of multiple rounds of the game, of this game like in the traditional game theory, let's give participants of this experiment more information about the game. What are the costs, the benefits, the strategies, the actions, all the information of the game, right? So when this experiment was run again with providing more idea of what they were doing, she found that the people or the participants in this behavioral experiment, instead of saying no, I won't cooperate no matter the rounds or the game or the benefits, the people learn to cooperate. So they learn the benefits of cooperating, how to cooperate, and for a long-term commitment. So in general terms, this learning or this game is telling, okay, the experiment that Eleanor explains in this paper, learn to teach us about institutions. Like if we inform and we have better information and different capacity to assume roles and participate and distribute costs in a better way, of course, then we will have more cooperation and not less cooperation. She also found that, for example, in this laboratory experiment, that face-to-face communication in these public good games produced substantial increases in cooperation. So the interaction, the capacity to discuss and analyze and be heard, and also not only have a say, but also know that your opinion is going to be considered in the decision, etc. That leads to cooperation. So we have we can do parallelisms of Eleanor in blockchain systems in many, many ways. Maybe, do you want me to continue with this or do you audience have questions, or I can move into how these parallelisms, I see them in blockchain systems.
Yeah, actually, that's where we're going to go. I just have a few comments on what you said, Mariana, and then we can move into how these parallel systems apply to blockchain and how it alters governance or can alter governance right now in our societies, especially in the context of more localized communities or parallel societies, or even the Logo Circles network that we're developing
Yes.
and building right now,
Yes.
right? So
Yes,
one of the first things that I think about as well, Mariana, when you were mentioning the polycentric social order and how top-down systems and the individuals involved in those systems don't have the knowledge to solve, even if they wanted to solve all of these myriad of problems, they're just not, they're unable to. But also, I think about, you mentioned the Austrian school economists, and this is the exact critique that they had of command and control economies, especially in the communist regimes, where there's this idea called the calculation problem economically. In a command and control economy, you're trying to redistribute wealth, and you're trying to sorry, do you mind muting, Mariana? Getting some feedback from your mic too. Thank you. So in a command and control communist economy, or any kind of command and control economy, really, there's a total control over what kind of resources gets distributed within the context of that economy. But the problem is that the controllers, the central planners, don't have all of the knowledge of all of these micro actors, so they're not going to understand what to actually allocate. And this is one of the reasons why these communist regimes have easily fallen apart, because they don't understand how much of a given good or resource to allocate. This is why a lot of these systems end up causing mass starvation in these populations, right? So this is very much related to what you're talking about, because as we're trying to unroll a polycentric order, and this is just my perspective and my take on it, this is like unleashing market forces and giving powers back into the individuals and the communities and their networks to solve problems locally within the context of their communities, right? This also gets into a lot of our friend Michel Bowens in his work, where he's talking about we should do what we can to keep manufacturing, right, local, whereas we can handle all the design templates, design apparata in the cloud, and then we can apply those to local communities where the local individuals have a very precise understanding of those problems, right? And one other thing I wanted to mention that I thought about when you're talking about polycentric social orders, a lot of times this is juxtaposed or compared to common law structures in societies that are no longer with us. I think very quickly about the Gaelic Ireland and Gaelic Irish law. It very much was a polycentric order where a lot of the problems were resolved or arbitrated on a local level within the context of the tribe. And the tribe, of course, would go to the Brehon were the local judges. And those judges, of course, were all privately sanctioned by the tribes, and it was all based on reputation management, which I'm sure we'll get into a little bit. But the idea there is that there's no quote unquote crime against the state. There is no king. There was a king, but the powers were just ceremonial. It wasn't actual power. So this is what we would refer to as a distributed polycentric common law network, which worked for 2,000 years. I want to really enunciate that for the audience. That worked for 2,000 years and was highly distributed and way more free. But that is not to say that it was quote unquote utopian or was perfect. Anyway, so I just had a few comments on what you said. I really enjoyed that particular segment. But yeah, let's get into the blockchain piece of this, Mariana. How is this parallel society governance and this polycentric social order applicable to the technologies, not only that we're building here at Logos, but also in our communities and across the world that are emerging right now as we are literally having this conversation? Let's get into it.
Yes, sure. I will go to that. I just want to make a comment on what you said. The other day, I was talking to someone about decentralized autonomous organizations, and I was telling him how these organizations coordinate actions and decisions through the governance token and self-enforcement modules. And then he was like, oh, what you're telling me sounds to me like a communist thing where collectivities is manage and have a say, and individuals are erased from their freedom of choice, etc. So I said, in my opinion, it is exactly the opposite, because decentralized organizations and all the blockchain ecosystem economies are the most liberal ones, because you can enter, you can exit, you can do whatever role you want to assume. So no one is like dictating your individual decision making. And I think also this is very, very liberal way of thinking on blockchain institutions. Sorry, blockchain institutions are the most liberal illustration of these Austrian economists. Sometimes we misinterpret the creative destruction of Schumpeter, like if it means coming and destroying everything and then just building whatever. No, what I find here is that the possibility to self-correct of these systems and the possibility to have dynamic flows of feedback and self-correction is what allows to improve every time the institutions. And this brings me to another comment I had during the weekend with this person. She said to me, well, maybe think about when you give a lot of freedom and there's a lot of freedom, then you have also problems because you cannot, like, how do you restrict or stop hostile actors, and how do you manage with that? And I say, well, think on the traditional system we live in, where we will have hostile actors everywhere. But think now on the possibility to address, for example, crime and this type of actors, where you have nation states that define the rules, and you cannot change the rules until the next election, assuming that you have some democracy to change the rules. Whereas if we live in kind of a cyber state or network state, the community can change the rules as much as needed to precisely address hostile actors and malicious actions, right? So moving into that, exactly what you moving into the blockchain institutional order. Well, I try to explain or think, how can we see in specific examples social institutions on chain? No, because it sounded to me very abstract, and I say, okay, cool, yeah, I get the concept, but how can I see it in like tangible things, tangible applications? So I started to delve some of these, And I began by thinking on the actors, and that's why I make this distinction on tokenized tribes and other online communities. And in fact, the tokenized tribe term, I borrow it from Jared when he mentioned in the offsite that blockchain communities were in fact tokenized tribes. At that moment, I just wrote that in my notebook, but I said, I have to know what this is and what does that mean, no? Because tokenized tribe, okay, cool. There's a token that represents the tribe, or what does that mean? So I started to research on that, and what I found, it's a great work from Misiones, Iolkowski, Sobolokolina, and Schwabe. They work in Zurich University. They have a couple of papers that explain tribal governance, and I say, hey, this sounds good to me. I'm going to check if this is what I am looking for. And yeah, they explain or try to make classification of online communities and networks. And tokenized tribes are blockchain online communities, and they belong to blockchain because to some extent they are free open source software communities. But unlike open source communities, that, well, people cooperate and improve the software and forks and innovate, the incentives are different according to these authors. So tokenized tribes in blockchain communities and this polycentric order, what they have is interdependent interests. Maybe the information mechanism these tribes have, well, not maybe, the information mechanism is the token, no, and the token economics. But these tribes have skin in the game. So for example, if an application, an institution on chain is solving needs and it's giving response to their requirements, then it is less likely that this software is going to be forked because they have already built value and are creating value on that application or on that institution. So that's what differentiates a little bit open source software communities from tokenized tribes. So I think I am finding what that term means in terms of what Jared meant for circles and logos grassroots building of a cyber state. But there's more work to do and more thinking to do and more work. But these authors are stupendous. They give wonderful insights on differences between a tokenized tribe and an off-chain online community. And then I moved into thinking, okay, cool, these are the actors in this order. So how are these actors building institutions? And then I present a few examples that you can find in the article. Not all the cases, because that's like for more articles than just one. But we have new ground. For example, speaking of information flows and information that Eleanor mentions in her principles of best practices in polycentric systems, I was thinking, okay, cool. How can we see information and information flows in blockchain institutions? So they already exist. This is the good part of these systems. They spontaneously emerge, and without a central planner telling them to make applications for information. So where can you see these institutions? Well, one of them is there, and we didn't thought about it as an institution, is the decentralized oracles. Those are reliable, those are providing and mediating information flows in and out of blockchain ecosystems. So the challenge here is to keep them resistant to tampering and manipulation and and decentralized, right? But this is one institution already there, and it's like, oh, so much studying for telling me that oracles are institutions. Yeah, well, yeah. And these are important, right? Because if you have better information and information flows, then these tokenized tribes will make optimal decisions, right? And then you can see more applications, decentralized applications that are in fact on-chain institutions. For example, all these indexing protocols. I did not mention brands in the article because someone can say, hey, they are paying you to make advertising. So, but you can figure out which ones. No, I'm just joking. Maybe they will say that I receive payment to put the brand in the article, but you can figure out, for example, who is making indexing protocols where you can make data queries from the blockchain and support analytics and tools that aggregate data for you to make decisions. And the simple example is in decentralized finance, where you can find more platforms offering all sorts of analytics, statistics, and metadata from decentralized finance applications, so that you can make better strategies for your investments and your portfolios. So these are on-chain information tools, but in fact, these are institutions on-chain. And then we can move to how these tribes, unlike the experiment of Elinor Ostrom I mentioned a few minutes ago, where she says face-to-face communication enhances cooperation. Well, how can we cooperate in a blockchain cyber state when you don't know the face of your the other counterpart, the other parties, right? But what we are building, or the communities are building in on-chain, is reputation-based execution. And this is, well, for me, it's a great finding, like to do this very simple description and analogies, but well, it's the way I learn. I hope I contribute to the description. These reputation-based execution are applications. You can see them in the space as passports, or you can mint badges that accumulate into non-transferable tokens, non-NFTs. And then with these NFTs or these passports, you can make the case of your achievements, or your that you are a honorable person, or behind the address, no, on chain behavior. And these tools, little by little, and I think in the future will be very, very powerful, to allow others to assess credibility without needing intermediaries, right? So as smart legal contracts evolve, and the possibility to make on-chain contractual relations, this reputation-based execution, where their passports or NFTs or whatever the technologies will be, dynamic NFTs or whatever, soul-bound tokens, these are in fact institutions where you will be able to trade, or to get a job, or give someone employment, or participate in one of these tribes in a tokenized way. And then how can you verify reputation if you don't have a government or someone telling that that person has credibility? Well, these mechanisms are doing that. And then you can find, well, I can say the brand here because it's home brand, the Status Network. It's a reputation-based institution. It's a layer 2, but it's also a way in which you can build a reputation through Karma token, and then access to gasless transactions. So we can think of it as a layer 2, and that's it. But this is generating a new institution that is reputation based. And then we have a lot of examples, the automated agreements, And something that interested me a lot, and it is not very deep in this article because it requires more analysis, is the way in which these institutions are growing in modular ways. Just like decentralized finance allows for composability, and then you can build manifold financial services just as Lego pieces of Lego. In the same way, institutions are becoming modular. And then you can, I think of a tribe, a tokenized tribe, or a decentralized organization, a DAO, where these modules are already in governance as a service way of saying it. And then you can take your module of dispute resolution and your module on how to build reputation and the module on verifying identity in a sovereign and private way. So I think institutions are becoming this kind of Lego assemblage. And I am not the only one thinking of it. I found a paper of Danny Frolov, who already mentions the great horizon in the future to build modular institutions. So yeah, we have a lot of examples. One I find very interesting is this application called Sherlock, and they are kind of making the module of preventing crime. They are using they are building ways in which you can audit applications before using them. So this is kind of a policing institution, right, on chain. So instead of having a regulatory agency vetting if the company or the application is good for consumers or audit before using it. So they have like a marketplace of auditors, and it's building also like reputation of applications before you get into a trap, no, or a fraud, a scam. So yeah, I have plenty of examples, not exhausted everything in the article because, well, it's going to be very boring, but maybe I can do more articles and then make more cases. I want to pick questions if you have, and because I can speak like for 4 hours, but I need to let the audience to make questions or feedback.
Absolutely, Mariana. First, I want to say that that was an extremely astute articulation of how blockchain finance, DeFi, governance applications are actual institutions. And I think, or at least I hope, that everyone who is in the chat can very clearly understand that when you are engaging in different types of financial activity online via the blockchain, maybe you take it a more advanced step further and you're doing something like lending or staking or any of the other number of DeFi activities that you can engage in, you are effectively engaging in a smart contract based institution, right? And maybe this hasn't dawned on a lot of people, but this aspect of institutional activity is effectively already a replacement for legacy institutions, right? Namely the banks in this case, or at least it can be a replacement for those institutions. Now, I have one last question that I think really deserves an answer and a bit of a dissection. And then we'll get into M is on the stage, and I think he had a question. He had his hand up earlier. He's waited patiently. We'll get to M, and then anyone else who wants to come up and engage in this discussion is more than welcome to. But the thing that comes to my mind, and that deserves us working through the different levels of abstraction, is what about, and you mentioned this in your article, this idea of core, like physical problems, dispute resolution, courts, trying to figure out how real world problems are actually, and conflicts are actually resolved through these new blockchain institution. How do you see those being applied? You kind of made one case with the governance kind of court earlier, but maybe it needs to be brought to the ground for some people a bit more concretely, so that we can maybe we can unpack that a little bit. How are the physical components or ramifications of this in meat space going to be managed or handled?
Yeah, you mean the dispute resolution with decentralized courts, right?
Correct.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, as I said, in polycentric order doesn't mean that the order is um, immutable and there is no conflict, no, right? Every system will have, we are humans and we make mistakes and we have flaws. So every system will have conflicts. The advantage of polycentric orders is that dispute resolution mechanisms give justice in more accessible ways, because you can discuss the problem and figure out the cause or of the dispute and try to negotiate, kind of what we have in these arbitrage organizations. But these are very expensive, and these are only for like very huge amounts of in dispute of commercial trade and things like that. And for ordinary justice, what we have is courts. In some countries, courts doesn't work and are corrupt, etc. So this is a very important institution that we are seeing in blockchain ecosystems emerging. We have bugs will happen, oracles will make errors, there will be exploits or attacks despite the automation. So we need to solve these disputes on chain, because if we think, well, the communities are probably, or naively, without thinking on this, but they are doing it, is that if we have problems on chain and then we have to move to the traditional court, it's like, okay, cool, let's go back to the centralized system and that's it, no? So what is important here to mention, and what gives me a lot of hope, no, in building parallel systems, is that justice or dispute resolution mechanisms are also on chain. And instead of having regulatory agencies and going to inefficient courts that do not understand on-chain mechanisms and hoping that they will learn will take a lot of years, blockchain ecosystems have built on-chain courts, decentralized arbitration, and escrow-based adjudication mechanisms, all in smart contract and game theory and combination of common law. Yeah, it's like a combination of game theory, smart contract, and common law. So this we have one prominent example, that is the Claros Court. There are others in the space, not like honing their mechanisms to add more than a Schelling point to find the equilibrium of, or the resolution, adding common law. I don't know if I can say databases or appendix like ULEX, which is a compendium of common law practices that you can use peg to smart contracts and use it as to feed a court, a decentralized court. So little by little, this world is transforming, and we have this. And for me, these are key institutions that we can see now on chain, the dispute resolution ones. Not only courts, I said decentralized arbitration and escrow-based adjudication mechanisms. And this is why I call in my article the blockchain revolution, because it is not only something that improves the capacity of the industry or a technological transformation. This is a technology that is changing the core structures of the society and the political infrastructure. So I call it a revolution, also inspired on what Teda Skocpol says in her book States and Social Revolutions, she says in her book that social revolutions are transformation of society's state and structures. But social revolutions is mostly in her book are also include violent movements, no, like armed movements or not movements, armed war, no. We think on the Russian Revolution, the French Revolution, or the Mexican. Social revolutions involve violence. So I said, no, I cannot use the term social revolution. So I said, no, this is a blockchain revolution per se. So that's why I use that term, revolution, because it is changing all the ways in which we can coordinate, interact, organize our activities, and also with permanent effects and global reach. So that's why I call it a revolution. And thinking on how this is changing a behavior and at the very, from the bottom to the up of the social structures. Well, yeah, this is a radical transformation. And that's why I use that term.
Thank you. Sorry to interrupt you, Mariana. I think we had a really nice answer there. I want to give anyone who wants to ask you questions also a time to speak. I will mention briefly that is a phenomenal answer. Plenty of different ways that we can leverage dispute resolution mechanisms on chain to solve physical problems, real world problems. So, and to your point, this 100% is a revolution. I would even say an evolution, right? Where we can leverage ideas like Gandhi's notion of satyagraha, except now we kind of have a digital satyagraha, like a digital peaceful resistance that also has physical components, that involves hyperlocalism and communities that tackle issues, solve those issues, leveraging decentralized governance applications that create this transition, this paradigm shift to move our species forward. And like we said at the very beginning of this, going back around full circle, to at very least minimize corruption and corrupting dynamics, or eradicate them altogether by solving the incentive problems that we have, leveraging novel blockchain incentive mechanisms, which ultimately is at the core of governance, at least how I understand it. So anyway, I want to give an opportunity now. We can go on and on about this topic, probably, like you said, Mariana, for hours and hours. So let's give M the space to ask a question and contribute to the space. Any of you other guys who want to come up and chat with Mariana or add to the conversation, please don't hesitate to request. All right, M, this floor is yours. Welcome, my friend.
Hey, Sterling. Hey, Mariana. Hey, guys. How are you doing? Just wanted to ask a little question related to this topic that is getting way deeper and way more interesting as the minutes pass by. Wanted to ask, for this type of institutions that you're talking about, how would you solve a physical problem in a peaceful way when most of the institutions are corrupted nowadays? Like, it will be by creating a new institution related to this type of platform, or you will look for institutions that are neutral in this case, like NGOs that are completely not involved with any type of government administration.
Yes, I want to answer your question by saying that, well, my answer to that is that in this social evolution we're experiencing, nothing is linear, right? So these institutions will have more adoption in through these tokenized tribes as they prove effectiveness, right? Because we can't have things in black and white, like, okay, we need to close traditional institutions because we have now these ones. That in my perspective, social processes do not evolve in that way, in that linear. These are in the evolution of societies, things are iterative and progressive, and you go back and forth and you correct. So when you have corrupt institutions without an alternative, you have to live under that. But the good thing now is that we have these alternatives on chain. So the more we work as communities or open source software communities, improve these courts or these escrow smart contracts or whatever the case may be, and they prove more effectiveness, even for traditional companies, not necessarily a DAO, even for traditional hierarchical firms, if these institutions prove to be more effective, then you will have like this migration, and the others will die by becoming empty of users. So if these courts in on-chain prove the capacity to do arbitrage processes with lower rates, lower fees, better optimal results, and for example, in trade disputes in Hong Kong and Paris or whatever, Europe and Asia, in a very seamless way, then we have this displacement is going to occur faster, right? So I think that's, in my opinion, that's the way it is going to happen, in an iterative and progressive manner. That.
Very nice. Thanks for the response, Mariana. Well said. We have TD on the stage now. I want to give TD, he's got his hand up, a chance to ask his question and give you a chance to respond as well. Welcome to the stage, TD. Good friend.
Hi. Thanks a lot, Mariana, for the presentation. I have to say I missed a small part, so in advance, sorry for if I ask a question that is already answered. But you talked a bit about theory of equilibrium from the Nash theory from the point of view of economics, and I wanted to ask if you have investigated any partnership with mathematicians who have studied Milfield games or chaos theory. I have some connection from the past in this area. I wanted to say, just by curiosity, if you had investigated the area from the mathematical point of view.
Oh, yeah.
References.
Yeah, thank you, TD. Of course, I would like to. Yeah, I am at the conceptual and I am like socioeconomist point of view, like game theory and things like that. But I would feel very, very pleased to meet your colleagues and put mathematics on it, and that could be awesome, no? Like to model these institutions with more like formality or technical formality from that, with that perspective, of course. And yeah, because, well, how this is important, well, for me it's a personal intellectual challenge to think on these kind of things, but it is also, I think it is also relevant to study, because we can also preempt things as a policymaker or policy evaluator. I think in every transition to new systems, there are always losers and winners, and then perhaps I would like that blockchain transformation into cyber state or digital communities living on chain, that there are the least number of losers, right? Like no one left behind. So if we understand better how these systems works and how you join them and how you can make a living out of them, etc., then I think we can also push ways in which no one is left behind, right? So yeah, the more formality we can add to it, I will be happy to. And if your colleagues accept me in their discussion as well. Thank you.
No, actually, it's ex not colleagues, but just ex references I read, but just a reference just for
Sure.
Mean field game theory has been introduced by Jean-Pierre Alasri and Pierre Williams, and chaos theory I know less of it, but I think there are more references. But I think what you are closer to is mean field games theory. But
Awesome.
happy to talk more on Discord or Twitter. Or, yeah. I have also close connection to Mexico, but we can talk a bit about that another time. Thanks a lot for the presentation in any case.
Super. Yes, I am here. Bueno, in Logos Discord channel. Yeah. So we can connect there. Thank you.
Cool. I'm going to take this time right now to reset the room just a little bit. We have Mariana who wrote a really amazing article. By the way, I put the article in the Megatron. So any of you guys who haven't seen it, you can go into the Megatron above and you can click in and you can take a read of the article. It's fantastic. Mariana is an expert in blockchain governance. So personally, when I get called an expert, I hate being called an expert, but we can call Mariana an expert. At least I think she'll allow it. Okay. So we have we've had a really nice discussion going around blockchain governance. We also got into a little bit of the history of governance. What is a polycentric order? What does that look like? And how is that applicable to blockchain technologies, DAOs, DeFi, governance, etc.? And she has been articulating that for us quite nicely, I think, and answering questions. So if any of you guys are interested in coming up and chatting and continuing to ask Mariana questions, we're probably going to go for roughly another 15 to 20 minutes, depending on the questions that we have. But in the meantime, if any of you guys who are on the stage have any thoughts or questions that you want to ask Mariana, right now is the time, and we can continue having this conversation. If anybody new wants to come up, we can field their thoughts as well. And if not, Mariana is welcome to add anything that she thinks we might have missed, or I can move on to a question as well. A lot of options here, folks.
Yeah, I want to say that this is also a call or an invitation to write articles for Logos Press Engine. If you want to challenge this or other blog articles there, or add new ideas, the Logos Press Engine blog is open to the community, to the circles, because, well, that's how we do things, right? Like this flow of ideas and information is what makes us grow. So everyone is invited to write in Logos Press Engine.
Yeah, I'm really glad that you mentioned that, Mariana, because this is absolutely a community and a community-driven effort. And part of the community is that we want and hope to have contributors who are contributing not only technologically, I think that's 100% important, probably the most important, but also who are contributing theoretically and intellectually to our whole movement. That's part of the reason that we have these spaces too, is so that we can hash out different types of ideas and truly understand the direction that we're trying to steer this ship. And I use that, of course, loosely. We're trying to understand the ideas so that we can implement them in a decentralized way. And I think that's really important for trying to understand how these different types of frameworks, governance-wise, are going to function or can function in the societies, the new novel parallel societies that are beginning to emerge right now. So it's really bringing theory to practice. And the Logos Press Engine, in my opinion, is one of the conduits for getting these ideas out there. So you guys just feel free to reach out to us, reach out to Mariana, Chair here in the chat, me, Logos, and we'll get you in the loop so that you can start producing materials. We published quite a few pieces of content already from community members. So we're very much open to doing that. And also we can get you up here on the spaces to talk about those ideas as well, which I think is great. We have Chair here, who is in the actually the live room with me right now. Welcome, brother.
Hello. Yes, we are testing live video, and it seems to be working. So if you want to see Sterling's beautiful face, and look at me as well, find the live stream. I encourage people in general to go to press.logos.co and check out the abundance of material that's already there. And we have had multiple, I believe, community submissions. That is to say, like non-core contributors that are writing articles, and they are available. So press.logos.co. Also, the calendar of events is available there as well, and where to find us, and on what day and time. So an abundance of resources available. Press.logos.co.
Thank you, my friend. Yep. No short supply of resources, I would say. So whatever you need help with, helping as a community, move the dial forward. We got you covered. We got your back. Cool. So I think I'll move on to maybe another question here for Mariana. I have a list of questions too that after reading her article that came to my mind. Like one of the things that we talked about briefly, Mariana, that I think is important to clarify, and you mentioned it in the article, I thought it was interesting, is that blockchain communities are differentiated from, in your view, free and open source software to some degree, where there's overlap, maybe even significant overlap. There are some differences there, and I know you mentioned it in a cursory kind of way earlier. Maybe you can elaborate on that a bit more about the differences and the similarities so that people can jibe with it. So I think most of us here have sort of a gut reaction or a gut feel that free and open source software is like blockchain communities, right? It's very similar in a lot of ways because the technology that's involved there a lot of times is free and open source software, but maybe it's not. Let's chat about that for a minute.
Yes. Well, in this work I read from the guys in Zurich University, trying to understand what kind of actors we have online. Yeah, tokenized tribes are open source software communities, but in addition to that, they have different incentives and motivations. Like we have these followers that follow in social media, and those are like a digital community, but they are not probably organizing around some sort of collective action project, like in a DAO, no? Or a open source software community can contribute to the improvement of an operating system or a database software management, or whatever the case may be, a smart contract in industry. But the incentives to collaborate there are like different. They can do that for personal recognition, or maybe they also receive a compensation for the improvement. But a tokenized tribe, it's an open source software community and also has more skin in the game because they are organizing around some collective project. If it is a decentralized organization that handles a treasury or allocates funds to projects, whether social benefit, charity, or environmental or financial or whatever. So these organizations or these kind of communities have less incentives to fork the software because they already have, the goal in these communities is to add value to the token that like amalgamates them. So they create value, they are incentivized to create value, but that also goes in the growth and in the social optimum growth of the community. So these are different incentives than just a open source software that you can fork and improve and innovate. So these tokenized tribes, trying to understand. I need to ask Gerard if I am correct, but in his in what he thinks about tokenized tribes. But what I found in this research is that the incentives are different, and then you don't have well, you don't have you don't want to harm your community, because that goes in the you are dwelling your own stake, right? So these are different arrangements.
Yeah, I really like the answer of it being one of the key differences being that there's a collective action in the context of blockchain communities that is driven towards some primary goal. You know, there can be a goal, right, in free and open source software, but there's not always collective action that may have quote unquote political ramifications. There may or may not be. So I can see where there's these differences, but there is obviously very clear overlap between them as well, which I think is critical that we point out. I think we just have one more question here, unless there's anybody who has a burning thought that's in the space now or that wants to come up. But we didn't really get deeply into the future, kind of talking about the possibilities and what's happening now. But Mariana, where is all of this heading? What does the open institutional frontier look like? Let's say in the next decade. What is this technology? How's it going to come to fruition? What's it going to look like?
Well, to answer that question, I will repeat what I said to M. I think these are iterative and progressive movement, is the changes. The difference is that we, in a tokenized tribal governance or blockchain-based governance, we are all contributing to the improvement and to the institutional change. So the more we get as humans, we get into this alternative system, we will have more capacity to make the rules and change the rules. Of course, not everything will be as decentralized and automated, no? There's also a work I read, I cannot tell you now the author, it's in the references, but what these authors address is that, well, if the issue you want to automate is actually codifiable and verifiable, then you can verify it, then the possibility to automate and make an on-chain institution out of it it's higher than if you cannot encode the relationship. So yeah, we'll encounter relationships, contractual relationships, or other kind of arrangements that perhaps could not be encoded, no? So we'll have probably hybrid cases in that, no? I haven't studied those cases, but one that just pops up right now, and I thought about it a few weeks ago, is e-commerce, no? Because the more on-chain, it doesn't matter how much on-chain reputation you can make, if the book or the sweater or whatever you bought online doesn't arrive to your house, well, we have a problem. And this is kind of things that I think, okay, maybe intermediaries will last until some innovation comes. But yeah, e-commerce came to my mind when I read that paper. And yeah, if these platforms, the platform we have now, the big ones, they have their own mechanisms in house to prevent those. They protect their customer base. That's the point. So if you don't receive the item, these platforms pay for it, and they prefer to lose $300 or $500 than losing their reputation, and then they punish the seller and whatever, or they have these fraud prevention algorithms, etc. But I wanted to think on a very decentralized and automated e-commerce platform, and I cannot really figure it out yet, maybe. And there were decentralized e-commerce platforms where you have these arbitrators or curators, but I I try to use that platform and I don't really find it useful. So yeah, there will be cases where in the future we will see hybrids, no? I think that's my hypothesis. I don't know. I don't know if this is going to happen for sure.
Yeah, no, that's a really good example with e-commerce. I think just to overall thinking about the near term and even the further term future of deploying different types of governance applications and really unleashing the full potential of the polycentric social order, I think, and we talked about this and you mentioned it at length, Mariana, is solving the incentive problems that lead to corruption and that lead to governance inefficiencies that plague our current communities and our current societies. If there is a really key factor in the thing that we need to get right structurally in our societies, it's figuring out how to solve these incentive problems. Because right now, talking about game theory, we have all of these runaway Molochian dynamics, right? Where everyone is ultimately incentivized to optimize for their own well-being at the expense of collective flourishing and collective betterment. And that has created a massive lose-lose scenario for most people who are embedded in this game. But having the incentive infrastructure repaired gets at trying to solve these problems. And I take issue with there's a lot of people out there, and I have debated with these folks time and time again, that don't believe that these problems of corruption and governance inefficiencies can actually be solved. They think this is an artifact of human nature. Somehow the warrior gene being embedded in our DNA means that automatically all of our governance institutions are always going to be broken, exploitative, and extractive. I wholeheartedly disagree with that sentiment. I think that this is largely, a lot of our behavior is driven by the incentive network that surrounds us. And if we erect systems that are top down, that have obvious gaps and flaws in the way that they function and the way that they produce outputs for society and the way that they are inputting feedback from that community, obviously you're going to have complete breakdowns and you're going to bring out the worst in humanity in that process, right? And this is why we have these runaway dynamics. I think one of the key insights for me, really growing up into my intellectual adulthood, was realizing that most of the problems that plague us are largely related to game theoretic breakdowns in society. So solving for game theory has to be one of the primary focuses. There's another point of this that I want to get into, but right now is going to take too much time. This is really your show, Mariana, so I want to give you the last tidbit or last comments, and then I'll start to shut us down. But a really amazing discussion, and definitely got my juices flowing. I hope it got everyone else's mental juices flowing as well.
Yeah, for me, it's I thank you, and I thank everyone that was here. I find this topic amazing, and there's a lot of work to do. And exactly, human beings are our behavior can be shaped, and instead of having constraints, what we have in blockchain is the possibility to model behavior such that we all make the best out of us, right? With the right incentive mechanism design. So yeah, I agree with you, Sterling.
Absolutely. Beautiful, Mariana. Thank you so much. So, but as we close up here, first thing I want to do is thank all of the folks who stayed in it for this conversation. I know that some of the topical content that we got into can be rather heady and some of it even abstract, but I do think Mariana did a great job of bringing it back down to the ground and making it extremely palatable for most people. I want to thank you guys who came up here and asked questions. So MTD, thanks so much for your contributions. Chair, thank you also for coming up and having a chat and being in the video space with me, getting to, show off our physical features and manifestation. Good stuff. Also, you guys who are OGs and been part of the community for a long time, thanks for being here. OW, Moo, Uzair. We have Laylo in the space, OPDE. We have Mark here. We have a few people who are new to the space, but this is the second or third time that they've come. I want to thank you guys for being here. We have Odd Name as well, supporter. Looks like one of our partners, Human Tech, is actually in the space as well. D-Clench, man, you guys are amazing. So let's keep everything amped up as we start to move into Parallel Society in Lisbon. You can see it on the actual live feed, Lisbon, 6th through 7th March, ps.logos.co. If you don't have your ticket, definitely go get your tickets. We really want to see you in Lisbon. We're trying to build this community in real life and in real time, and everyone's here and we're together, and we're going to push it forward. We're going to catalyze this institutional revolution, as Mariana refers to it as. So again, thank you for being here, Mariana. We're going to continue to do these spaces. Next Tuesday, get ready for the next Logos, online Logos Digital Circle manifestation. So thank you guys, friends of Logos Network. We appreciate you all. If there's anybody who requested a chat and we didn't have time for you today, feel free to come into the next space, especially on Tuesdays where we have community can come up at any time and chat with us. Thanks so much, guys. Much love. Thanks again for setting up the video broadcast, Chair. Good shit.
Thank you. Bye.